Good morning, everyone, and welcome to episode 66 of the On-Air Advocate, where at the On-Air Advocate, we look to provide education, support, and empowerment for all of those with different abilities, mental and medical illnesses, and their caregivers. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Tammy Flynn, and I'm the host and producer of the On-Air Advocate, and I am super excited that you are joining us here this morning, or if you are catching this on the replay. Now, as you guys know, if you think any of this content could be relevant or helpful for anyone you know, please share the love and hit the share button so other people can enjoy this broadcast as well. Now, for some of you that have been following us for almost the last 3 weeks, we have had a heavy focus on mental health awareness. And so with that being said, I am so excited this morning to have here Dr. Jeffrey Karst. He is the Assistant Professor of Pediatrics at the Medical College of Wisconsin, as well as a pediatric psychologist over at Children's Hospital of Wisconsin. So welcome, Jeffrey.
Thank you, Tammy. It's so good to be here with you today.
Yes, and I am so excited for you to be sharing this information, not only because it's critical information that everyone needs to know, but that we are right in the trenches of back to school time. And when we talk about bullying and bullying within our schools is such a huge issue and topic right now. And then we talk about how that correlates to mental health. I just think this is so significant, and I'm so happy that you're here to share it with everyone.
Thank you. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's an issue that really transcends all areas of childhood, whether you're a parent, whether you're a teacher, a professional, a pediatrician, or a psychologist, anybody working with children. It's something that you're aware of, but I think that it's also such a broad and such a difficult and challenging topic to deal with.
Right. And I think that just from our conversations and stuff, I think the first thing that you were talking about is really understanding what bullying is,
right?
Absolutely. As an overview.
And I think within that, one of the most important things to clarify in talking about bullying is really talking about bullying as a behavior and not as a person. I think it's very easy to get into labeling of, oh, that person at school is a bully, or that person in my neighborhood is a bully. And I think the more you look at the research and the literature out there, what we see is it's much more helpful, and it's actually much more accurate to look at bullying as a behavior that people can both be a victim of and can be a perpetrator of. And that it is, really defined by a couple of key themes.
Okay.
The big thing with bullying is to really distinguish it from just pure conflict. I think one of the kind of misconceptions out there is, oh, kids just fight or kids just argue. That's a natural part of childhood. And I think it can be a really dangerous message to send. Bullying is not a normal part of childhood. It is not something people should have to accept as a typical part of their day. And so when we distinguish bullying from conflict, we're talking about behavior that is intentional, behavior that is repeated, behavior that is meant to harm another person, whether that's emotionally or physically, and probably most importantly, that it is related to some imbalance of power. And I think that really helps kind of distinguish what we mean when we're talking about bullying. Okay.
And what are some of those risk factors of bullying?
Mm-hmm. So the reason that I've gotten really into this area specifically throughout my training and my work as a psychologist is working both with children with developmental disabilities and now working with a lot of children with special healthcare needs, is one of the strongest risk factors for children to be a victim of bullying is to have any sort of difference or disability.
Really?
Whether that's, again, emotional, physical, medical, any of those things can create a risk of somebody being a victim of bullying. Additional things that are significant risk factors, including just being unable to defend oneself, not having not having resources or connections to help, and sometimes those children who are singled out, who are a little bit ostracized, then become so easy to further pick on and to further bully.
Easy target.
Vicious cycle, absolutely.
For that. And with social media being such a craze these days, and every child having an electronical device and all of that. I mean, I think back to when I was in elementary school and how different things were to, right now. You may have gotten picked on at school, but that couldn't carry on every hour of your day and then have these huge amounts of people, like everyone within your circle knows about it within 5 seconds. What are your distinguishing factors and kind of the risk things and the differences between cyberbullying?
Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing with bullying is a lot of, like you said, what we classically think of bullying is the student beating up another student on the playground, some sort of physical confrontation, and that certainly still happens. But bullying can really manifest in a lot of different ways. We see bullying as physical. It can be verbal. It can be, making threats or making disparaging comments to somebody. It can be social. It can be just creating rifts and putting somebody in a difficult position socially. Or it can be destruction or theft of property. But like you mentioned, the really salient one now, and the one that I think is probably both the most prevalent and the most dangerous, is cyberbullying. Mm-hmm. And this is in part because it can take place in a setting that is often anonymous. So somebody can actually engage in that bullying behavior without themselves being identified. It is harder for parents or teachers to monitor. Right. You think about some of the social media platforms whose sole distinguishing feature is that their message disappears, or that it can be written in anonymity. And that's really terrifying if you have a child who's a victim of bullying, because they don't have any physical evidence often. They don't have anything they can bring forward.
Right.
One of the things that I've heard about from multiple individuals I've worked with and families I've worked with is bullying taking place over video game platforms. And that one was a completely foreign concept to me. The idea
now that there's all the live.
Right, exactly. Their child is playing a video game and can be actually bullied by whether it's people that they know or even people that they don't know, but over this online platform. And again, it creates such a barrier because there's both anonymity. It's hard to identify who the bully is. And for the person engaging in the bullying behavior, it actually depersonalizes things a bit. When they engage in cyberbullying, it can kind of take away that one protective factor of seeing another person that's actually being physically and emotionally harmed by this action. That can make it very dangerous as well.
Yeah, I think it's the scariest thing ever, and that it can be accessed. I mean, it can be accessed anywhere. And some parents think, oh, well, my child doesn't have a phone, or they don't have, they don't have this. They can go to the library. If they're at the library, they're, at school, a lot of the, if the schools don't have heavy blockers on them, or the libraries outside of the school where kids go after school time. I mean, there is just so much access to that. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to, as a parent, figure out, how do you protect your child from that? I mean, how do you do that? What are the avenues and ways that we have to protect ourselves, aside from us just talking about it more and it being more out in the open and in schools and stuff, verbalizing it, the protection factors of it? I don't know if there is.
Yeah. I think the things that we try to emphasize, because like you said, it's out there and it can be difficult to monitor. And as a parent, it puts you in a very tough place. I think we're in this kind of balance right now, between parents not wanting to be labeled as a helicopter parent who monitors every aspect of their child's behavior and every interaction with their friends, while also knowing that there is this dangerous, culture of bullying that can take place. Right. And so I think the things that I try to emphasize to parents are being very honest and open with your child, making sure that those are honest conversations rather than sneaking onto their social media account at night, talking about whether there's those negative interactions happening, or trying to get some sense of trust and sharing that is a regular communication happening. Having a sense of connectedness with peers. Right. One of the most dangerous things about bullying, and one of the things that, as we talk about the mental health aspect, that can be most isolating, is that it just becomes so isolating. It becomes this factor where a child completely is ostracized from their peers. And so finding a group or a club or an activity that the child can join can be really helpful.
Right.
And then just monitoring and watching for any of those changes that you might see when somebody's a victim of bullying is important for parents as well.
Right. And it is hard to say that if your child was being cyberbullied or even bullied at school, that they're going to come to you. I mean, unless it happens and you experience it with your child firsthand to see if they're going to be honest to let you know. Why do you think so many kids keep that so protected? You know, I mean, I hear from other parents as well that their child was being bullied, and it took so many layers looking at their behaviors and how they were acting out at home and whatnot to figure out that they were actually being bullied. Why do you think that that's such a hard thing for kids to come forward and really talk about with their parents and people who love them?
Yeah, it's a really difficult thing for kids to talk about. And that's one thing I emphasize to parents is don't assume that no news is good news, you know, and for teachers the same way. What we often see happen is a child may report to their teacher that something is happening, and the teacher tries their best to intervene, and nothing really changes. And so the child goes to their parent and they try to, you know, tell their parent about it, and the parent tries their best to intervene, and nothing really happens. And then the child develops this really dangerous sense of hopelessness or helplessness that, okay, I've talked to people about it and nothing is changing, and they may stop talking about it. And unfortunately for the parent and the teacher, they may interpret that as, oh, good, you know, my child isn't talking about it anymore. The problem is resolved, or my student is no longer bringing it up. It must be getting better. But that's not the case, exactly like you said. Sometimes children just feel helpless. They feel like they may not talk or report bullying behavior because they don't think anything will change. They can be embarrassed by bullying. They can feel like if they talk about it, they will be seen or perceived as weak, or that they are not just able to handle it. You know, we have, again, sort of that sometimes you'll hear that, oh, this is just part of childhood. It's just kids being kids. And so often children and teenagers don't want to say something because they feel like they will just be the kind of victim blamed. They will be accused of being the one who's just unable to tolerate the bullying.
And something that I thought was astounding is when you shared with me the number of kids that have special healthcare needs and different abilities that are bullied, and looking at also from a mental health perspective. But I was just astonished by that. Not that I don't know that it happens, but as I shared with you, you know, my son now for the last, you know, almost decade has gone to a self-contained school where our whole entire population has different abilities, you know, and acceptance. But when we're integrated into our regular school systems and whatnot, that isn't always the case. You know, there may be 5 kids that have some different abilities within the room. Can you share some of those numbers and kind of reasons and things that you see happening with that, with our different abilities community?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something that is, like I mentioned, also a personal kind of interest of mine. I worked with children on the autism spectrum for almost 10 years, and then currently work in Children's Hospital with people with a variety of medical and physical and emotional disabilities. And it's a population that is very prevalent. It's almost a quarter of the population if you think about children with special healthcare needs. So this is not a very small subgroup. This is a large portion of our child population out there has, whether that's, again, an emotional or physical or mental health concern that puts them within that category. And they are at much higher risk. The research suggests about 2 to 3 times more likely to be victims of bullying behavior. Almost 60% of students with special healthcare needs report being bullied. And they have those risk factors that we talked about that put them at risk for ongoing bullying. They're more easily singled out. They can sometimes be more inherently trusting of others. They may have lower self-esteem from the start because of their physical or emotional challenges. And I think one of the saddest and one of the most difficult is sometimes they don't identify the bullying. Or that they may not realize that what is happening to them is bullying behavior. And one of the pieces of advice I give to parents of children with special healthcare needs is to really open up a conversation on a consistent basis about their friendships. You know, if they're talking excitedly about a new friend, what is it that they do with the friend? And what is it that they, you know, enjoy about the friend? Making sure that they're not in some way being inadvertently or unknown to them that they are being victims of bullying behavior that they may not even be aware of. And that's an important thing to kind of continue monitoring for.
Have you seen an increase within schools and communities, like every year that has gone on, with bringing more awareness into our school setting, not only awareness for individuals with different abilities, and I'm saying integrating that and sharing that within our school setting, but also with bullying, more programs and opportunities for families to learn, for kids to learn, because I feel like if we don't talk about our differences, I feel like when we talk about our differences, knowledge gives everyone power to understand, and sometimes when we don't understand things is where we're able to nitpick at them because we don't understand them, so they must be weird. And so for a lot of kids, I find that when you explain it, or even when there's children that come forward that say, hey, this is my condition, and you explain it to your friends, you've eliminated all of that confusion and not knowing, which sometimes leads to bullying and being picked on for different things. But have you seen an increase in really integrating that into schools, that we're getting this knowledge to the families and parents and teachers to start teaching this more on a regular basis in our school settings?
I think so, and I think you touched on the most important point, is that it's very crucial because a lot of schools have, over the past several decades, attempted to do different things, implement different programs to try to mitigate the bullying problem. Some of those are very effective, and some of them are very minimally effective. Again, one of the, like I mentioned at the beginning, when they take a peer conflict approach, when they're trying to solve this as if it is an argument between two people that just needs to find a middle ground or be resolved in some way, that approach tends not to work well. But like you highlighted, one of the things that is actually shown in the research to be most beneficial is just educating. And I think schools are really trying to do that, to teach about not being critical of differences, but also not ignoring differences, to actually take that next step and to say, let's talk about and acknowledge and celebrate different abilities, whether those are mental or physical or emotional. And let's be, it unfortunately sometimes can put the onus on the child with a special healthcare need or their family to be very open about what they're going through. But if they are able to do that, I think then that education, exactly like you said, allows others to learn, and they can gain both knowledge and then gain empathy. And what it ultimately does is it helps to break down that power differential, which is that really, again, major kind of variable that we think about with bullying, that if you have a child who is able to explain that I am no less of a person, I am no less able just because I have this set of challenges, then it helps to reduce that power differential that can be such a significant risk factor.
Right. And how do you feel that, like, within our school system stuff, like, how do the kids, building this resilience, creating, kind of a team of supporters, is there kind of a step-by-step process that when you're talking to kids, you give them as kind of their action plan, I guess you'd say? Like, if you feel this is happening, this is the next steps that you should take.
Absolutely. And, it can vary based on the child and their parent and the school district and, exactly what the situation is. But I think generally one of the things that I try to do in terms of, like you said, kind of that graduated model is encourage children and parents to be vocal about what's going on. If there's bullying behavior that's happening, not to get to a point where they feel like they have to accept that that's just what's going to happen, but to continue being a voice. The challenging thing as a parent can be being calm in your approach. I think of with my own children, and nothing is more challenging to think of than your child being ostracized or picked on or bullied. I think it's makes you emotionally very charged up as a parent, and so it can be hard. But I do tell parents that if you can take a somewhat measured approach with the school, that can be a very good start, and to really work your way up the chain, to talk to the teacher, see if there can be a response, and actually ask what will be done about this. Not just, wanting the person who's engaging in the bullying to be punished. That actually isn't as helpful, but actually creating, again, like we were discussing, to create, how can we make the classroom learn about differences and celebrate differences and be more inclusive? And starting that as step one, and then working their way up if that isn't being met with enough help. If they need to talk to a principal, if they need to talk to a superintendent, if they need to work up the ladder within the school hierarchy, then they can do that. But again, really emphasizing that focus, not just on punishment of bullying, which only goes so far, and instead really focusing on how can we create a culture within each school? How can I create a culture in which my child will not be targeted, will not be victimized?
Right.
And when I've seen this work, and I think of a couple of specific individuals I've worked with and have had the blessing of having really good friends or really good advocates or allies in the school system. And it is incredible what a culture shift can happen just within a single school, where suddenly, rather than being bullied and isolated, those differences are celebrated, that child is protected, they become the one that nobody absolutely is going to pick on because they have people that are looking out for them.
Yes, and I always encourage too. I have done some advocacy last year. There was quite a few individuals that had some bullying, issues going on, and I was very impressed with some of the principles and the actions that are taken. If, as a parent, just talking about it or going to the school and barking about it, I don't think is something that changes anything. I think it's sitting down, and I felt like a lot of the schools were open to integrating, bringing in the other parents, and having the kids and the parents talk together and then meet each other in face-to-face. So it's not like one person's talking to the principal, the kid's getting in trouble, the other person's here, but actually bringing the one who is bullying, the student together, the parents together, and really having open communication to kind of squash, the issue fully versus carrying it.
Right. And I think that's so important because, again, what often happens is there's a large proportion of students who can engage in both being bullied and being a victim of bullying behavior, as well as being a person who is bullying others and who is engaging in bullying behavior themselves. So when you create that kind of classroom or school-wide approach, it helps to, instead of creating this dichotomy of bullied versus bullies, it creates hey, this is, again, it's a behavior. It's not a person, but it's a problematic behavior that's occurring. And one of the things from the mental health perspective that is shocking is the kids actually at highest risk for mental health concerns and suicide are children who are engaging in both of those, who are themselves being bullied and who are bullying others. That group seems to be at increased risk even compared to kids who are just bullied. So I think it highlights the need to make that, again, a very kind of inclusive whole group approach to solving these problems.
Because looking at that behavior, if you are the person with the behavior of the bullying, usually there's something going on inside of you.
Absolutely.
Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think in some ways the only thing more frightening as a parent than thinking of your child being bullied is of your child being a bully or your child engaging in bullying behavior. But often that's the difficult thing, is that child may be a victim of something going on at home. Perhaps they're dealing with emotional or mental or social challenges of their own. In fact, having a special healthcare need is a risk factor, not just for being bullied, but for engaging in bullying behavior. It can make children have more difficulty being socially aware, being socially perceptive of what's going on. And it creates, again, once somebody is isolated, bullying behavior can be a way to try to make them feel included again. Well, if I can pick on somebody else, then maybe I'll be accepted by my peers. And so we really, I think it's an important piece to be aware of, is that sometimes you have to monitor not just for your child being a victim of bullying behavior, but for them engaging in that behavior as well.
And, what's shocking to me too is that, it used to just be that you were being bullied or this was a behavior that was happening and which brought on some of that depression and alienation and anxiety and all of those things. But now it's gotten to the point, and I don't know if because there is social media, we're just more aware of it and it's been happening this whole time, but young kids actually taking their life, from this. And so I don't know if it's always been this prevalent, but it seems like, because obviously we have social media and you see it so more openly now, that it is happening. So, do you have any statistics on if that has changed at all?
Yeah, so the Center for Disease Control came out with kind of an updated research findings recently. And within the broader field of mental health, like you mentioned, they show increased rates of depression, increased rates of anxiety, more attention problems, more behavior problems, more school difficulties, even decline in school performance. So there's this host of mental health issues that occur when somebody is a victim of bullying behavior, and those seem to be directly related. what they kind of suggest, and what's sort of a unique thing with the suicide piece of that, is that there does seem to be specific cases where children specifically are taking their life because of bullying behavior. But the report says that they are unable to fully link suicide with bullying, kind of from the research perspective at least, in part because they caution against making suicide a normative response to bullying. They want to be kind of careful in saying what is or what isn't a way of managing bullying. They don't know whether it's become more prevalent over time. It doesn't appear to be, but I think, like you said, it's out there. Social media has made it more, we're more aware of these things occurring. There was the Netflix show that came out a year or so ago, The 13 Reasons Why, and that created a significant conversation, I think, because of some of the things the show portrayed, whether they portrayed always well or accurately, about bullying behavior and the connection with suicide. And of course, that's terrifying for people that can ultimately be the outcome of this. But I think it highlights the importance, whether it's a direct cause or whether it's sort of an indirect or contributing factor. It highlights again how essential it is to recognize and to intervene in these situations.
And from your perspective, I have heard that some schools are now starting to integrate having actually mental health as more of like a class and a topic. I think that is an amazing step forward. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, I feel like this starts at such a young age, and we don't really talk about as mental health as a whole, not just as, as bullying. I feel like so many of the topics are just, everyone's quiet.
Absolutely.
About them.
I think it's so important that we not have mental health be such a taboo issue. That talking to a counselor or a psychologist or a therapist not be seen as a sign of weakness, but as something that is actually not only normative in childhood to deal with these concerns, but again, can be really helpful to acknowledge and talk about depression, to talk about anxiety, to talk about difficulties that somebody may be having just from an emotional standpoint. And I think education is always the key to that, and making sure that it's a conversation just as we would talk about physical health, right? We have physical education class throughout school. We emphasize the importance of eating right and exercising, and yet sometimes the mental health piece of that can fall to the wayside. And so I do think it's critical for schools to make sure that is an active conversation that's had, even starting at a very young age, just teaching children to recognize and identify emotions and to create a comfort level with sharing those emotions and not feel like that's a sign of weakness or a sign of something that is different or wrong with them.
Right. Yeah. When I saw that, the last article coming out, there's a school, I believe it's in New York or whatever, now that just integrated into their regular curriculum. I was impressed, because I thought, this is a step in the right direction. This is another, step forward, and really ending the stigma of, that it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to have emotions. It's okay to ask for help, which I think sometimes is stifled. So if we have viewers that are watching today or catching this on the replay, and they're the parent, they're noticing some of these behaviors within their kids, what would you say as a parent is kind of that next step? If you're in question that your child might be going through some things, are there resources or action plans or things that you would suggest, hey, if you're seeing this at a small level, a big level, how to move forward?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of things that are important for parents to do upfront when their child is, again, if they're kind of watching for some of those warning signs, if they see that their child is being more avoidant, if they have a decline in grades or their mood is just down, they're having more physical complaints, more headaches or stomach aches, and they're seeing some of those kind of warning signs. Just to start that conversation, just talk to your child about what's going on at school, what's going on with your friends, and try to, without prying too much, which tends to make children shut down, just trying to get some information about what's happening and trying to remain calm, because it can be helpful in those situations to show that you're compassionate, but that you're going to take a calm approach to this issue. But to also really reiterate to your child that they're on their side and that you are with them and that you're going to work together to solve this problem. Because bullying can be so isolating already. I think one of the instinctual things as a parent you can do is say, I'm going to pull them out of school, or I'm going to take them out of all their activities and just keep them safe and keep them here with me, which is sort of a natural instinct as a parent if your child is at risk of being harmed in any way. The challenging thing about that is that can actually almost exacerbate the problem. It creates even more isolation. So along with talking to the school and trying to problem solve within the school system or within the community, wherever the bullying is taking place, one of the first things I talk or recommend for parents is that they work with their child to find a place of inclusion, to find a group or a club or some extracurricular activity or something in the community that they can feel proud of and that they can connect with others doing. Because once that sense of connectedness, once they feel that they are welcomed and accepted in some group somewhere,
Right.
it does help to mitigate a little bit the effects of the bullying that's taking place in another context.
And when you were saying about like removing kids, that is the first instinct, because you're like a papa bear or a mama bear. You're like, I don't want them to go through this, and you wanna take them out of that situation. But I feel like that builds a ton of anxiety. If you remove your child, it's kind of like if they're, a child that has different medical impairments and illnesses and they're not at school for a long time and they're away. I mean, do you feel that same way, that them then re-engaging and re-emerging into their classrooms, then there's a whole bunch of anxiety because of that, because they haven't been there?
Right. Yeah, and I think that's always a tough conversation with parents, because I'm never going to tell a parent they shouldn't homeschool or shouldn't switch schools. If they feel like that is what's best for their child, they need to do what they feel like is best. But no matter what that action is, and if they feel like the environment is, they have tried solving the problem and it's not changing, then I completely understand that tendency to say, okay, I need to get my child out of this situation. It's just not going any better. But I think that then emphasizes the need to find a place where they are accepted, where they do feel connected, especially as they go from childhood to adolescence. As a parent, your hope is that they're always just going to want that connectedness and that sense of belonging with you. And for children with special healthcare needs, I think that instinct can be even stronger in parents, because you are so used to being an advocate for your child and an ally for your child and the best friend to your child, that it can be hard to let that normative piece of adolescence and emerging adulthood take place, where you let them connect more closely with their peer group. But that's such an important thing to happen, especially when somebody has been bullied, because otherwise that message of this is something wrong with me can take place, right? If you're removed from a situation and you're not put back into any other social context, children can start to internalize that message. They can start to feel like, oh, I guess I don't fit in anywhere. I guess I must just be meant to be alone. And if I am anywhere, I'm just going to be rejected. And that's a really dangerous and a really difficult message for a child to start to internalize.
That is. With that said, would you say that there are any other, obviously we have here in the state of Wisconsin, Children's Hospital Wisconsin and Psychologists and all of that. There are people that are listening from other states. Would you recommend any different organizations or support systems? I know you gave me some links of some good ones. Is there some ones that you, as a doctor, work with or have worked with before, or know of other families that have worked with, that really are an awesome website, awesome resources for them to go to?
There are a couple that are kind of national sites, and there's a couple right within our community. So there's the stopbullying.gov website that has a fantastic array of resources and handouts and educational materials and things like that for parents and children and classrooms. I think that's a tremendous resource. There's also it's called cyberbullying.org, and it's a nice website that has a nice array of resources specific to that really, again, fairly new but very prevalent cyberbullying issue.
Okay.
And then there's two local resources. So Alverno College has a fantastic list of resources that is available for parents, for children, and for classroom teachers to have, that has a nice list of sort of do's and don'ts and what is bullying and what isn't bullying, kind of recapping some of the things we talked about. And then I'll plug that Children's Hospital has a site called healthykidslearnmore.com, and that has a nice, again, array of resources. So those are two local options, as well as, again, those national resources that have a good amount of educational materials, which is really kind of where it all starts, is building that education base among families, among schools, among communities.
Right. Now I'm going to drop all of those links below. So if you didn't catch that while I was talking, those will all be available to you. Now, I'm excited for the people who do live here in the state of Wisconsin, that the 15th annual Care in the Community Conference is coming up in September. So I just want you to share just a tiny bit about that. I know that the focus this year is on, family well-being and mental health, which I think is wonderful as we talk about this, and more awareness needs to be, driven to that. So can you just share a tiny bit about the conference?
Yeah, absolutely. No, we're really excited. So this is a conference that's hosted by the Southeast Regional Center for Children and Youth with Special Healthcare Needs in collaboration with Children's Hospital of Wisconsin. And so the overall theme, like you mentioned, is looking at family well-being and about mental health broadly in terms of awareness, prevention, and support. So kind of across that spectrum. And I'll be talking about some of these specific things about bullying that we've been discussing today and going into more detail about what bullying looks like, what it is and what it isn't, and what you can do as a parent, what you can do as a teacher, and giving some of that perspective. So a little plug for myself. But then we'll also have a nice community panel that will be talking about mental health more broadly, and there's some parents and some providers from the community that will be part of that panel in the morning. And then a couple of breakout sessions in the afternoon, and they're going to go over a variety of different issues. So we have social workers and physicians and mental health counselors from our community that will be speaking within these breakout sessions. So just, talking about mental health challenges in the family, talking about even infant mental health and self-care and navigating the mental health care system. So a lot of wonderful speakers and some really good educational talks. And then I think the great thing about the conference is there are an array of booths and resource tables available. So if you are a social worker, if you are a parent, if you're a teacher, or just somebody who wants to be an advocate, who wants to know how to respond and help individuals with special health care needs, there are just this array of resources that are available in our community and that a lot of people may not be aware of. And so it's a tremendous conference for that. It gives you a sense of connectedness. I think it creates this nice, inclusive community to talk about these issues, while also not just stopping at talking about them and saying, and here's this wonderful, vast array of things we can do, and these resources that we have in our community. And that's the really nice piece, is there's some really practical things that can be done and that are available there.
That can be utilized not only within our workplace, if that's what we're coming for, but or developing action plans at home for your own families and kids and all of that. So that is September 27th. We will be advertising it as well on our page with the link. So don't worry if you didn't catch the title and all of that. I will drop those links below. And before we go, Dr. Karst, is there anything else that you would like to add?
Yeah. I think we've covered the majority of the things that I wanted to talk about. I think the take-home message, the important things I like to emphasize to families, kind of going back to this is, a very widespread issue. And this is something that is very prevalent right now that we have to deal with, but that we have to be very aware of how we're dealing with it. The victim versus bully mentality or approach to bullying can create a real disconnect and can actually make the problem worse. I think focusing on inclusiveness and acceptance is the real key, and providing education about children with different challenges, again, emotional or physical or medical, whatever those are, and providing a sense of community for those children so that they can feel connected and less isolated. I think that's incredibly important, whether it's a parent, whether it's a teacher. Celebrating differences, that's really kind of the heart of it. And just empowering children to advocate for themselves. I think for parents, that's one of the best things that you can do as you advocate for your child, is creating a model of that, right? And showing that it is important to stick up for yourself. And that doesn't mean fighting back with physical aggression, but it does mean that you don't have to accept that bullying is an answer.
Right.
This is something people deal with in the workplace too. This is not just a child and adolescent issue. In fact, there's, I think, even more and more literature coming out about bullying in the workplace and what that can look like for adults. And that can even be helpful to talk to children about, modeling for them, hey, this isn't just something that, a 10-year-old deals with. You can be an adult in your workplace and have a boss that is engaging in bullying behavior, or a coworker who's engaging in bullying behavior. So this is stuff that everybody has to deal with, and so it makes it very important to talk with children, especially about those strategies that can be helpful.
That is all. It's wonderful, and I thank you so much for taking your time out this morning to spend with us. The content, amazing, and I hope that everyone ingested all of this morning and kind of takes it in and takes it with them for our kids. But I'm glad that you added that at the end about also adults, because bullying does happen in every facet, that you're involved in, no matter what age that you are. And so teaching our kids to advocate for themselves, as well as ourselves as individuals, because what we accept is what we'll receive. So we need to stand up, for ourselves. So I thank you so much for taking the last 45 minutes or so with us. I so appreciate it. And so on that note, everybody, thank you so much for watching this morning's edition of the On Air Advocate. If you would like any more information about the On Air Advocate, you can head right on over to onairadvocate.com, and you will find all of our resources, services, as well as tutorial videos, podcasts, etc. In addition, if you would like to become part of our private group where we have conversations each and every day, you can head right to the top of this Facebook page, hit the visit group, and put a request in to be part of our community. So on that, thank you so much, Dr. Karst. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tammy, and hope to see many of you at the conference in September.
Yes, definitely. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.